Come, comrades, we must clarify and vindicate communism. This is what the left cares about nowadays. I know what you're thinking. But if you don't care about it, why are you talking about it?
To keep you fools from drinking this poison. That's why.
But honestly, as unlikely as it is, I can't help but feel like this video is directed towards me. And seeing as though I am a subscriber of Bad Mouse and respect him and his work, I felt justified in making a response. So let's get started.
Many of us have the idea to hide away from explicit references to our ideology because it's just so far removed from every day.
We're all communists, they say. You'll hear Bad Mouse repeat this assertion throughout the video. It's ridiculous. Most leftists are not communists. Even if you omit the vast majority of leftists who are progressives and gradualists like myself, you still have democratic socialists and the libertarian left who also reject communism. Not to mention active participators in socialistic organizations who have no ideological affiliation and who are, frankly, more revolutionary than most modern communists will ever be.
Now, this is well understood. There's no shortage of quacks and loons in the world.
You mean like cult leaders?
That come across to us as ridiculous and never going to appease anyone. Except when they do. So it's frequent then to think we should instead take up a new ideology. Embrace a new ism.
That would be an exercise in futility. All that does is further drag out the process of social change.
Or at least alter and transform our perceptions into a new label in order to come across as more appealing to the kids.
The kids, as in young people, as in the vast majority of people who gravitate towards communism, because it's idealistic and sensational, because it's flashy and edgy. Instead of worrying about what fad the kids are into, maybe we should focus more on what the general public experiences and learn from that. Maybe instead of obsessing over things like labels and theoretical models and arguing about whose God is better, whose tendency is better, maybe we could support existing solutions that address real-world problems.
How about that?
If we value the works of Karl Marx,
I do.
Our relationship to that, I think, should be one that reflects it.
You mean like an international federation of socially owned, democratically controlled enterprises? Wait, please correct me if I'm wrong, but Marx rejected co-ops, right? Except in his time there weren't 1 billion members worldwide, and co-ops weren't exactly a part of an international social movement, were they?
We must thereby also recognize that the works of Marx and Engels do not exist in a vacuum, in total isolation from one another, but rather they're part of a shared history that includes various people who are all inspired by one another up to this day.
Sharing a name with successful revolutionaries doesn't make you their equivalent.
They took from it, applied it, and developed it in practice over a long period of time. And they all used the word communism. If we were to disguise this word with something else to sound more palatable, something more generic, more Goodingtonism, that would be the first step in removing ourselves from that shared history. And what would happen is we would lead ourselves onto a confusing and utterly ambiguous path. It's easy to think that keeping this label will give our enemies more firepower. Objection! But this is the opposite of the truth. In practice, I find it creates ever more uncertainty, obfuscates our ability to argue, and gives our opponents, frankly, the upper hand. I might also say that it makes me feel you're not taking this seriously by hopping from one word to another once it becomes undignified to the public. You do know, people already have weird conceptions about us. They think we're mysterious, we like to hide our past away from prying eyes. Do you not think that changing the name or label would simply just add to this stereotype? How long is it before you're simply going to be heading down the ballot box route because you've exhausted all other options?
If our only options are voting and a communist revolution, we're in big trouble. Thankfully, that isn't the case at all. You're just not exploring your options.
I think this question ultimately begs a grander point. I don't want to be disingenuous. I want people to learn about this stuff.
Finally, we agree on something.
And this is what separates us from many other different groups and ideologies. If we were to reject communism on the grounds that it alienates the public, why stop there? Even prior to the Soviet Union, socialism was still covered in a ton of negative stigma anyway. Why not therefore reject Marxism proper?
All I'm hearing is, I don't care what people think, now join the people's revolution. Look, no one cares what you call yourself, or even what your subjective worldview is, really. What matters is what you can prove. And as far as I can tell, you aren't proving anything to anyone outside of your echo chamber. With all due respect. In most parts of the world, communists are in the extreme minority. And to make matters worse, there's so much infighting, sectarianism, and dogmatism that it blows my mind how anyone could, for example, join any one of the 20 Marxist parties in America. Most of which have a hard time breaking 1,000 members, by the way. And this is a movement that is supposed to prepare the masses for revolution? Marxist fan clubs? Give me a break. I've said it before, I'll say it again. How can you have a revolution of the masses if the masses want nothing to do with you?
We should just be social democrats. It's easier that way.
Yes, it is.
It attracts a bigger base.
Yeah, it does. Not to mention, social democracy provides millions with things like universal housing, healthcare, and education. But sure, let's just reject social democracy completely on the basis that it isn't red enough.
I would like to remind folks that there are tendencies out there whose very existence creates the basis for the almost entire introductory point of said ideology.
What?
I would like to remind folks that there are tendencies out there whose very existence creates the basis for the almost entire introductory point of said ideology.
Okay!
If you reject the label because it's alienating, you reject all research into why people have these alienatable views in the first place. And you will never solve the contradictions this way. In the words of Boots Riley, yes, that Boots Riley, it's really the result of anti-communism that people tend to call themselves vanilla anti-capitalists. A lot of folks will say that's not true, but it's a way to say I'm not part of those mistakes that happened before. In reality, we are all part of those mistakes. Whether you call yourself a child of that legacy or not, you are. We have to look at those things. That is why I call myself a communist.
Maybe our legacy shouldn't revolve around dead idols and regimes with sketchy reputations, or unrealized theories, but instead real-world movements responsible for real social change. Maybe, as Martin Luther King once stated, the kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in the thesis of communism nor the antithesis of capitalism, but in a higher synthesis. I'm social capital. Solidarity forever. Peace.